Finovate showcases cutting-edge banking and financial technology through a global conference series featuring short-form demos and thought leadership. Now, the conversation continues on the Finovate podcast.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Finovate podcast. Joining me today, we have John Driscoll, CEO of Naked Development. John, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
So, as we like to do on this podcast, can you kick things off by just giving us a little bit of background on yourself and your career path?
Yeah, so I actually came originally into tech from the mortgage banking industry. I owned a mortgage bank back in 2000 and turned it into one of the highest producing mortgage banks in California at the time. And during that process, I started making software. I built like a mortgage banking solution with Salesforce back in 2001, I believe. And we did that more for our company. So I kind of fell in love with making software at that time. And then I exited in 2006 and messed around for about a year and started kind of moved from the mortgage banking thing into software full time in 2008. When the iPhone came out, or actually the iPhone came out in 2007, but when the App Store came out in 2008, and I started building apps, and I built them ever since. So it's been quite a journey. We did a lot of stuff with big companies at first, and then we really fell in love with startup about 10, 12 years ago, and really dove in headfirst and just started working with startups, and now that kind of has really put us on the map. As we spend all of our time innovating and trying to build new stuff.
Yeah, and I think, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the clients that you work with, because I've seen kind of a partial list, but I know that you do a lot of work, a lot of consulting style work with early stage companies. Can you talk a little bit about some of the companies that you've been able to work with, or the types of companies that are kind of the sweet spot for you?
Yeah. So, most of the people that come to us at the idea stage. They're building a product. They come to us because we have, world-class designers and a real consulting process to really kind of figure out your product in a way that's going to be conducive for early stage. And I think that is very much a part of our DNA. My co-founder, Jason Martinez, is just a brilliant designer. And then we created a process about 10 years ago about how to really ask questions with the team that we're working with and kind of understand where they're trying to enter the market and how to make sure that the product really fits that. So that is kind of our core competency, I would say, for early stage. And that's how people get to know us. And then we come behind that with a lot of, marketing strategy and all of that, within the design process.
Yeah, no, I think there's obviously a lot there, and I would encourage people to check out more about Naked Development and what they do. I think the piece that we really wanted to talk about today is kind of looking ahead as an early stage founder and thinking about the type of exit that you ultimately want to have, because I think this is an area that sometimes people who are early stage entrepreneurs don't always think that far into the future. And here's an area where you probably have quite a bit of advice. So can you walk me through some of the big pieces that founders need to be aware of early in order to really help them get that successful exit that they're looking for?
Yeah. So imagine building a building and you didn't know what kind of building you were building, and you were just kind of fluidly deciding that as you went. That would be a pretty terrible way to build something. And I think that's how you have to look at building a company. And I think a lot of early stage founders, in fact, I coach quite a few of them, they often try to live in the middle. And I don't think that works very well. I think you kind of have to decide between two types of companies you're trying to build. And I normally really, really try to get them to hone in on what that is, between two that I call, obviously the one that everybody knows is a unicorn. You're trying to build a unicorn. You're trying to build $1 billion valuation company. That is a certain type of company that you're trying to build. And then there's another one that I call the cash cow, which I think isn't as sexy, but I think it's better in many cases. The Unicorn One is a high risk, high capital intensive experience, right? And normally the founder has to put off a lot of the future success for a decade down the road. That's really kind of the path. And they got to spend a lot of their time raising capital, right? They're going to be playing with VC all the time. They're going to be, working on their pitch deck and, all their data, stuff that they've got to share. They're just going to be living in that world constantly. And that is a really interesting road. I don't fault anybody for wanting to go down it, but I just think people often think it's the only path. And I think there's another path that we're seeing now, especially since development costs have come down in the recent past, where you can build something a lot cheaper than you could, say, 5 years ago. And so I'm really encouraging people to consider the cash cow, which is a company that's often profitable within a year or two, something that you're going to experience, success in your personal life as a result. Maybe you're seeing profitability and you're actually seeing your life change as a result of it, and not needing necessarily to raise money, all the time. Maybe you have to raise a couple rounds, but maybe you're not spending the next 5 years, raising capital, which I think is just a different road. And I'm actually a big fan of it.
Yeah, no, certainly I think a lot of the companies that come to Finovate would fall into this pattern where they want to become unicorns. And as you say, that's a fine ambition to have if you're kind of consciously making that choice. But there is another path there. And I'm curious, what are some of the concrete things that founders can do if they want to go more towards that cash cow style of company? What are the things that they need to really be aware of early on as they get started to kind of make that happen?
Yeah, and I know you guys focus on fintech a lot, so I'll definitely even speak to that. So I think for a long time, people kind of saw, uh, you know, even the low code, path as a bad path, especially for fintech, right? Like they just say, "Oh, well, that's just a substandard, way of coding something." And I actually think for startup, it's a great way to start and to really get market fit right. And so I think a lot of people could save a ton of money by, taking a low code path to creating their startup. And yes, sure, maybe you need to convert to a different tech stack down the road, but the 2-3 years it takes to really find traction, you could save a ton of money by developing a different way, not taking what a lot of CTOs think is the only path, which is the path of just creating a big stack of tech, so that you can grow and scale. People think about scaling too quickly. They don't even have market validation and they're already talking about scale. And I'm like, scaling what? What are you
Yeah.
scaling? You don't have anything to scale yet. And so I think that that's the real problem, is they're always trying to take the elevator to success instead of the stairs.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair way to put it for sure. So, and I want to come back to this idea of kind of building a successful exit. If you are going for that cash cow model, what does a successful exit look like? Or is it the idea that you don't actually exit, that you just kind of create a company that churns out profit and you just kind of keep staying with that company for as long as you want?
So I actually think there's an amazing exit here. And that is because, let's say you have an incredibly profitable business where you've got a clean cap table. Just imagine this. I think we can't even imagine it
Yeah,
sometimes,
yeah.
right? It's got a clean cap table. You've got profitability early. You've got, subscriptions and customers who are happy with what you're offering. Who doesn't want to acquire a company like that? Who thinks that they could scale it to a unicorn themselves? I think that that's a really attractive company to purchase. So you can either do that, or you can decide, like many founders have said, like, why, if I created something I really love, why would I want to leave it? If I'm making profit and my life has changed and it's, the thing I love, why would I want to leave it? And I think what's great about a cash cow is you can really put yourself in the position of deciding whether you even want to do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this is a really important piece because if you engage with a lot of venture capital, you do lose control over your own company to some extent. And you don't necessarily have that choice at the end to kind of figure out how long I want to go. Eventually, the investors may force you to make a decision that you might not have otherwise made. And so again, there's a lot of positive outcomes that come from really trying to be a world beater, trying to get to that unicorn status. But it is worth thinking about what some of those potential trade-offs are. Now, I want to come back to something else we've kind of touched on a little bit, which is how do you balance as a founder the idea that I need to be aware of what my long-term outlook, my long-term exit looks like with kind of the immediate needs of the company? Because obviously, to your point, what are you going to scale up if you don't actually have anything that's already built? So how do you kind of juggle these two pieces simultaneously?
So I think it has a lot to do with your energy and how much time you spend at looking at something. So for instance, I would say a lot of people that are building something love to think and focus on the future. And that is important. I'm not discounting that. But I think that they can live there too long. So I give myself permission as a founder to think in the future at certain times. So, like once a year during planning things, once a quarter, I look at the future. But what I don't do is live in that every day. What I try to do so I can balance that out is really focus on what I'm actually trying to accomplish. So very much breaking it up into small pieces and trying to hit those quarterly goals. So what I think it has a lot to do with the focus of the founder. And that's why I say, there's such a difference between these two models, because if you are building a unicorn, you have to have a totally different focus on a daily than you do if you're trying to build a cash cow. So deciding which path you want to take has to do with, hey, what kind of activities do you want to do on a daily basis so that you can stay focused on those quarterly goals that you're trying to hit so that your annual goals are being hit, right? Like, so it's all about, to me, about being very systematized of breaking down what activities you need to be doing and not living in some sort of I don't know, futuristic, nirvana that a lot of founders live in.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I've certainly met quite a few people who would fall into that category of looking a little too far down the road, or potentially just spending too much time thinking about it to the point that they exclude some of the really bare bones things they need to be doing in the short term. In terms of what you're seeing now in the fintech space, do you think
Mhm.
companies are kind of drifting more towards the cash cow model than the unicorn model? Is that a shift in sort of the high level of what the fintech industry is doing?
I think so, and I think there's two reasons for it. I think one, we're realizing that the old VC model isn't always great for us, right? For the founder and the company itself. The VC, you have to always realize they have an end game for them. They're not necessarily totally concerned about your end game. Not that VC's evil in any way. I just think you have to realize that people have their motivations and what they're trying to accomplish. And so um, I think that yes, I think that that's happening for that reason. And I think the other side of it is that capital is choosier nowadays. And I think if you can show a profit or show a path to profit earlier, you're a much more attractive, you know, uh, early stage startup to invest in. And I think, investors are looking for, shorter term, wins as opposed to these, you know, long risky investments that they've made in the past. And I think you're just seeing a lot of capital going more towards the cash cow as opposed to the other one. Uh, in addition, let me say this. I think that means that you also can change some of the products that you're building. So I'm very excited about very extreme niches. And I think in the fintech space, one niche that I is what I would call a Trojan horse fintech, which is essentially a fintech that doesn't necessarily look like a fintech. In other words, it does something, it has a function, the product itself, right? But yet it's holding money. So it's technically fintech, but maybe people don't think of it like their bank. right? But it is a bank because it holds money. So I think a lot of fintech products, where you can go after a space where the need is very, very high because people need this type of product. I'll give you an example. One fintech that I'm involved in is it handles the tipping out for servers in restaurants. Okay. So you wouldn't
Hmm.
necessarily think, oh, that's a fintech, that's a bank, but it is clearly. It's holding money, and people have debit cards and they get paid every night because they want to get their tips every day. And so that model is very, very attractive. And there wasn't a ton of players in it when we got in. There was a few decent players, but it was very easy for us to get in and make a better product than all the other products in the space because it wasn't completely saturated by a million different players. And I think people are missing out on these niche opportunities. And so just a big fan of going after those. I think you get profitability faster, become more of a cash cow as opposed to chasing the unicorn.
Yeah, no, I think, and I think ultimately, it keeps coming back to this idea of you want to, as a founder, have a choice. You want to have the control over what your company will end up doing. And so, I think looking at it from that lens, thinking about really, really intentionally thinking about what do I want to build here? What's the building look like that I want to build before I start putting in that ground floor? Obviously, there's a lot more to unpack here. We have reached kind of the end of our time today, but I know that you had an offer for our listeners that you wanted to mention about a class that you're offering.
Yeah, we started, we have quite a bit of traffic and people that, are coming to us every month trying to work with us. And we unfortunately can only approve like 12% of them that get into our accelerator. So we started offering a free class to try to really serve this audience. And so we came up with a 5-day challenge for founders. It's completely free. And you can reach it at 7figure.app and take the free challenge. In fact, we're starting a new challenge next Monday. So yeah, it's great. And we've gotten some really, really wonderful praise from early stage founders.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I would encourage anybody listening who wants to learn more to go and look at that class. John, it's been a real pleasure chatting with you. Some of these ideas are really high level, but so important for founders to be thinking about. So I certainly hope our audience has taken quite a bit away from this. But yeah, thanks again for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate you having me on.
The Finovate podcast is produced by Informa Connect in association with Provoke.fm Media. Check out Finovate.com for information on Finovate's upcoming shows and to learn how you can get involved. The discount code Finovate Podcast will save you 20% on tickets to all of our events. And you can email us at info@finovate.com for information on sponsoring, speaking, or demoing. Thanks for listening.